Welcome to today's celebration of Pride Month. My name is Tiffany Blakey and I'm the Fair Employment Practice Officer. June 2020 marks the 50th anniversary of Pride Month celebration, where members of the lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, questioning, and queer community, plus numerous other identities on the spectrum, come together to celebrate each other and raise awareness of issues facing the Pride community. Although COVID-19 has changed how we celebrate Pride Month, OFAP is excited and proud to have a diverse group of judges whose careers represent a series of firsts join us to discuss their experiences as openly gay members of the bench. With us today, we have the U.S. District Judge Staci Yandle of the Southern District of Illinois. Judge Yandle was the first openly gay district judge in the Seventh Circuit and the first African-American district judge to sit in the Southern District of Illinois. We have U.S. District Judge Darrin Gayles of the Southern District of Florida, who, when appointed, became the first openly gay African-American man to serve on the federal bench. We have Magistrate Judge Donna of the Northern District of California, who in 2010 became the first Korean-American and the first lesbian to become a member of the bench. We also have Judge Judith Levy of the Eastern District of Michigan. Judge Levy is a civil rights activist, and then with her appointment to the bench, became the first openly gay federal judge in the Sixth Circuit. And we have Judge Robert Pitman. Judge Pitman is of the Western District of Texas and once served as the first openly gay U.S. attorney in Texas, and upon his appointment to the bench, became the first openly gay judge in the Fifth Circuit. Today, we will hear their stories and learn from their experiences with the goal of gaining a greater appreciation for the progress that has been made and to come in achieving a diverse and inclusive federal bench. I will now turn it over to Lori Green, our Diversity and Inclusion Officer, who will moderate today's panel discussion.
Thank you, Tiffany. We're excited today to bring you a distinguished group of LGBTQ judges. We'd hope to have them live in the AO as part of our keynote presentation for Pride 2020. Unfortunately, COVID-19 prevented us from doing that. Nonetheless, they joined us in our commitment to bringing these issues around diversity and inclusion to the AO and to the judiciary as a whole. We look forward to this discussion with them about their experiences in life and as judges on the federal bench. With that, we welcome them and thank them for being a part of today's presentation. So let's get started with our questions. The first question is for all of you, and we'd like to ask you to tell us about whether you came out before or after becoming a member of the judiciary or the legal profession. And we'd like to start with Judge Gayles.
Well, I'm glad to be here and participate with this panel. I think for many of us, coming out is a process. And for me, I think there were three distinct phases for me. Starting when I was in high school, I started coming out socially and to my friends. Then after law school, I made the decision to come out to my family. And fortunately, it was well received. And as I learned, many of them already knew, even before I was fully aware. And but I wasn't out professionally, actually, until I was appointed to the state bench by Jeb Bush. I was a career prosecutor, and I was so concerned that it would affect me professionally in that world if I came out. But once I was appointed by Governor Bush, having been fully vetted, and he certainly, of course, knew that I was a gay man, that made me free. I felt free to be my whole self to everyone. And it's something that was one of the best decisions that I ever made, and I've fully lived my life as an out gay man since that time.
Thank you. Judge Yandle?
My experience was similar to Judge Gayles, and it was a process. First, coming out to myself, I wasn't aware of who I really was until I was in law school. And so after law school, I came out initially to my mother and my immediate family. And then I began working, and really in the 1980s in the legal profession, which was extremely conservative profession, not like today, and in the smaller bubble of trial work and a plaintiff's trial law firm in Southern District of Illinois. Suffice it to say, I wasn't really comfortable with coming out or even just dealing with or addressing my sexual identity. In fact, it was important to me, as I think we all feel, to make sure that I was judged on my abilities as a lawyer. And I think that came from a number of different things, not just my sexual identity, but being a woman, being an African American. So it wasn't like I wasn't, in the back of the closet. I didn't perpetrate. I didn't show up with dates to the to firm functions. But it was just something that I just didn't address, and I was a private person anyway. And then eventually I did come out to my firm and to my colleagues and my partners, just because I think at that point I'd been in practice for a long time, had been in the firm, and I was more comfortable in my own skin, and so that's how it was. But even then, I felt I was, being open, but I didn't know the difference, and maybe we'll talk about that later. I really didn't know there's a difference between being openly gay and being publicly gay. And I think, at least I know Judge Gayles and I found that out when we were nominated, because that was different.
Well, we look forward to maybe hearing more about that during this conversation. Judge Ryu, what's your response to that question?
So I am what you call a late bloomer. Mm-hmm. I came out in my 30s when I fell in love with a woman who has been my partner for the past 25 plus years. And it was something I didn't really understand about my identity until that time. So I came out all at once. I came out to my family, my friends, my colleagues, my community in that moment. And I think in part it's because of my personality. I think I'm somebody who is pretty transparent, and I was concerned that I didn't want to hide this thing about me that I had learned that I felt was really important. And so it wasn't easy, but I had to manage sort of renegotiating every relationship in my life all at once. The good news is I didn't lose anybody, and I was extremely lucky because I grew up in an immigrant family. My parents are from South Korea. I have 4 brothers, and I grew up in a fairly traditional household. So there wasn't a single moment where they turned their back on me. I mean, I think I stretched their minds a little bit, and their expressions to me were really out of concern for my safety, for my happiness, but they made it really clear that they loved me for who I am, and that just never really wavered. And that's very different from the experience that a lot of my friends went through. So very lucky in that. Now, I was also already a partner in a small firm. I had a reputation in the community as a lawyer. I was a mother of a 3-year-old. I was a homeowner. I sort of had a lot of status already in place. And so I think because I came out late, I zoomed over a lot of moments that young lawyers struggle with about should I be out, should I not, what consequence might that have for my career. So I got to fast forward past a lot of that. The other thing that I think didn't happen to me, for which I'm grateful because I know that this happens to a lot of other people, is I didn't go through moments of internalized homophobia because I came out so late. I think I had more of that as an Asian woman because, growing up, there are things in the world that told me being Asian or being a woman was maybe not as good as other things. And so I, struggled with that and continue to struggle with that at some level, but really not as a lesbian. I really never had to go through that.
Thank you. Judge Pitman?
So yeah, we all have very different stories, but there are common threads. Like others on the panel, my coming out was in stages. The first stage of my coming out was to my family and friends. And because I was from West Texas, from a very conservative religious community, didn't go so well. And so the first round was very difficult. And so coming out professionally, about 3 or 4 years into my practice, I realized, and Judge Yandle's description of being publicly as opposed to openly is apt. Never really lied to anyone, but also did not speak freely, and that became a burden to me. And so a couple of years into being an assistant U.S. attorney, I decided that I would come out and had some concerns. I wanted to take ownership of the narrative and timing of my coming out and going through background checks and just being a member of the community. It was just a matter of time. And so I did it very intentionally, but because of my past experience with some trepidation, and especially in that context, in the law enforcement community in Texas. And I have to say, second round went really well. I had surrounded myself with a bunch of kind, accepting, supportive people. And I was in Texas, but I was in Austin, Texas, and so that makes a difference as well. That was intentional, and so I have to say, by that time in my career, folks knew me, and they knew that I was the Robert that they had known the week before and the year before, and so it went well, and it was very affirming, and the rest is history. It was very interesting to now. I have to say that. Very happily that even though it was now a generation ago, my coming out was on the shoulders of those who actually did it right before me, who paid the price, who lost their jobs, who weren't considered for jobs. And I think I often describe it as I kind of rode the wave in on the work that others had done. And so very grateful for that, but also mindful that not everyone was so lucky, nor are they still.
Thank you. So Judge Levy.
Yeah, thank you. It's so wonderful. I will, Lori. Thank you, first of all, for having all of us here. I'm just so thrilled that we can do this despite the pandemic. It's good to see my friends and to see you as well. And I love hearing everyone's story. And like Judge Pitman just said, mine is also quite different, I think, from some of the stories we've heard so far. In the phases that Judge Gayles set forth for us, I came out in elementary school to myself. I could tell who I was watching, who I wanted to be with, who I wanted to be around. Of course, I didn't know I was a lesbian. I didn't know that word. I'd never heard that word. But once I heard that word, I just knew it was me. And once I understood. But I didn't really come out and really understand until I was in college, late high school, early college in 78, 76, 78 in there. It was challenging. It was a difficult experience, even though I was confident about who I was. You know, the only books we had were the Well of Loneliness and things like that to look to. But I came out to my family, and by and large, it went very, very well. There was concern. It's difficult. There's a lot of misunderstanding about what it meant to be gay and lesbian. But I have been out ever since, and I have never regretted it. I got fired from a job for being a lesbian. I had a physical assault with my partner at one time that was very challenging, and some bumps and bruises along the way, but by and large, it has gone just amazingly well. So by the time I went to law school, late in my life for law students, I was 33. I had been a full-time troublemaker in terms of LGBTQ. We didn't call it that at the time, but organizing and rallies and protests and speeches. So there was just, I was openly gay, publicly gay, all the way through. So that's my story.
Thank you all for sharing that. So my next question is related to what we've just talked about, and that is, and I'll direct this to Judge Yandle, but anyone who wants to contribute something, please join in. And that is, you alluded to some issues in your professional career that may have had to do with your sexual orientation. They may not have. But could you illuminate that to some degree so that we would understand what specific barriers you may have encountered and give us an idea of how you overcame those?
Well, I think in a generalized sense, the barriers that I encountered had a lot to do, again, with the conservative nature of the practice of the law profession. Mm-hmm. And also a combination of barriers, if you will, or certainly dynamics that applied more because I was a woman or because I was a Black woman in the 1980s who was striving to be a trial lawyer. And so it was really hard to discern, what this dynamic was. So I would say that there are challenges that I faced all along the way professionally because of who I was in total, that being an African-American female, gay female, young woman trying to be a trial lawyer, And I didn't but the good news is I didn't spend a lot of time trying to figure out and dissect, well, what is this about? Because first of all, I never allowed myself to be governed by challenges. I just did me and just went with it. But trying to figure out, well, where is this coming from? I didn't waste my time with that, really.
Well, I'm going to follow up because Judge Gayles, you mentioned being an AUSA. What was that like, being a Black gay man in, I assume, Florida? Correct me if I'm wrong.
Correct.
What was that like for you?
Well, I had a wonderful experience in the Southern District of Florida, and my concern was, in that macho world of prosecution. Not so much in the reactive cases where there's been an arrest and we were randomly assigned cases, or generally randomly assigned. It was more once I rose up the ranks, and in particular when I was in the narcotics section, and the DEA agents and the FBI agents who then investigated drug cases. It was overwhelmingly male. And my concern was for the bigger investigations that they wouldn't bring those cases to me because I was a gay man. That was my fear. And so I don't know if that was a realistic assessment or not. And so I stayed in the closet professionally until I was appointed a judge. And as I was saying before, Governor Bush is a conservative governor, and the fact that he appointed me to the state bench, that really said to me that who I am as a person is not necessarily a barrier to my success. Now, there was a situation as I chose to rise up in the state bench. His successor was not as open to appointing me, and I can only assume because of my sexuality. But that didn't stop me. And in fact, I think with President Obama nominating me to the federal court, of course, it was based on my credentials, but I think me also being an out and proud gay man certainly helped as far as the consideration as well. So I always advocate to people, be who you are, your full self openly. And there may be barriers, but you can't allow that someone else's bigotry to hold you back from how you choose to express yourself.
Okay, thank you. Judge Ryu, you mentioned that you came out well into your professional career, but nonetheless, being someone who I know has always been a friend to the LGBT community, even before you came out, would you comment on any changes you have observed throughout your career in terms of its openness to the LGBTQ community?
Sure. So I have spent my whole professional career here in my little corner of the world in the San Francisco Bay Area, so I can only speak from that experience. But I will tell you that it is night and day. It is night and day. I graduated from law school in 1986, and as I was leaving the doors, June of that year, the Supreme Court issued its opinion in Bowers versus Hardwick, which upheld the constitutionality of a Georgia statute that criminalized sodomy, even if it was between consenting adults in the privacy of their home. So translate that to the community, what that meant was, people were criminals. Gay people were criminals. That was the state, that was the law of the land as I was leaving law school in 1986. AIDS epidemic was still an epidemic and people were dying in droves. But where there is struggle, there's resistance. So here in the Bay Area, there were many amazing social justice groups that were coming into their power, whether it was the Lesbian Rights Project that became the National Center for Lesbian Rights, AIDS Legal Referral Panel, eventually the Trans Law Center, all of which are going strong today. And a lot of those groups really fostered the careers of terrific LGBTQ lawyers. Some of them went on to become some of the first judges from our community. But I will say that in private law, and I started my career in big law, the story was really different. There were some L's and some G's. There were probably some B's. There were no T's. I didn't know a single trans lawyer when I was coming out of law school into big law. I think that there were some gay lawyers, but mostly not that visible. So it might be a fun fact kind of that someone, this partner was gay, but not something that was really valued or made more public. So that was a state of things early on, but I have to say that everything has changed since then. I mean, now we have not only members of the judiciary. I mean, the judge who swore me in 10 years ago on this bench was a gay man. We have many LGBTQ judges, and we have a trans judge here in Alameda County, the Honorable Victoria Kolakowski. We have gay people at the head of every single major bar association and in positions of power. Of course, Lawrence came out in 2003, specifically overturning Bowers versus Hardwick. So the law of the land itself changed. So, night and day.
Is there a view from another part of the country that's a little different than Judge Ryu's perspective?
Yes. So I was born and raised in Southern Illinois. I'm still in Southern Illinois. I was born and raised in a predominantly African-American community in the Southern District of Illinois, being East St. Louis. We are right across the bridge from St. Louis, Missouri. And while St. Louis claims to be the gateway to the West, St. Louis is very Southern. It might as well be Alabama. And so, again, you have the layers of what was the tenor of the legal profession, but what was the tenor of the legal profession in the Southern District of Illinois, and what is it now? It is certainly better than it was in 1987 when I began, but I would tell you, it is still not as open and comfortable for people in the community to just feel like professionally they can be themselves as it is I'm sure in San Francisco, Miami, and even in Michigan. It's still a little, there's still, languishing behind just a little bit, but it is definitely different than it was.
Thank you. Well, as we talk about what it was like before and what it is now, that brings to mind the importance of mentors or other people that you can look up to. So I would turn to you, Judge Pitman, and ask you if you had any LGBTQ mentors while you were in law school or when you first started practicing law. Was there anyone you could look up to or turn to for encouragement and or support?
Unfortunately, I didn't know Judy Levy back then, which I had. Sadly, no. The truthful answer is that I came from a place, a community, where the existence of other people like me was not entirely clear to me. And so not only were there no models, there weren't any examples, even bad examples. And so I didn't have mentors and I didn't have people to sort of show me how to do this, but I had something that was perhaps as important, if not more important, looking back, and that is I had straight friends and allies who showed me not perhaps how to be a gay person, but they showed me how to be empathetic and how to be an empathetic person. And by that, I mean that I had friends who came from the same place I did with the same beliefs and prejudices. I had a reason to have to go through this and have to question and struggle. I was incentivized to do that because that was my lot, and I had to go through that. They didn't. They did it because they cared for me, and they wanted to go through that with me. And they struggled, and they questioned their own. I used to feel bad that I was the reason that they were going through this existential sort of time in their life, until I realized they're doing this because they love me. And that was huge for me. And it's something that going forward, I wonder whether I would have been, the jury's still out about whether I'm a good gay person. But I think I have, control over whether I'm an empathetic person. And I think that that's what they mentored me into. And that's what I wonder whether I would have the capacity to look at other people who are very different than I am, and that I don't completely understand who they are or what they're saying or what they believe. But I think I was shown the way to be open to that, and to try to listen, and to try to, where appropriate, question things that I've always assumed. And that was perhaps the biggest lesson that I could have hoped for.
Could I respond as well? Thank you. Just love what Judge Pitman said, and it caused me to think about an experience of my own, because I've, all things considered, had a relatively easy road as a lesbian throughout my life. And I've often questioned, how did that happen, that I didn't have as many problems as I did? And listening to Rob, I think part of it, I was raised in southern Indiana. We're a Jewish family where there were no other Jewish families. And I, from my earliest years, felt other than everybody around me. The teachers would say, there was one other Debbie Weinstein in my elementary school, and we would have to put our hands up and say that we were Jewish in first grade, or starting third grade, fourth grade, and all these things. And I felt very different as a result of that. And lots of stories of, did I have horns, and all kinds of things. And I think being a lesbian then it just didn't feel that unusual to be different from other people, because it was so deeply ingrained in me that I was already different. And so it's such an interesting thing how we all come to terms with this.
Well, let me ask you about any efforts you all might make individually or as a group to mentor law students or other young gay people.
I'll say I take take it on as often as I possibly can. I do any kind of speaking opportunity that anyone would want me to do for lesbian and gay law students and undergrads. And I actually sit in Ann Arbor, Michigan. And there's any number of student groups that are always looking for someone to talk to them. And I really believe, like Judge Pitman said, that others opened the door that I was able to push open and go through, and I hold it open. I hold it open for everybody who wants to come through it. So I for summer interns, for law clerks, I work very hard to make sure that I have a diverse group of people working with me and around me so that my mind stays open. And that's on issues of race and national origin, religion, but certainly LGBTQ as well. Because I have seen people not get opportunities still with federal judges because they're gay. I've heard the judges talk. I know it's happening, and I'm going to make those opportunities available. I think it's so important.
I'm very intentional in my efforts to mentor, to be inclusive in my chambers, in anything that I'm involved in. I quite often speak to various groups of students, law students, undergrad students here in this area. We've got a lot of, institutions, Washington University, St. Louis University, many colleges. I am somewhat part of the roadshow. Judy and Darrin and Robert and I, we've been to Harvard. I mean, we go wherever the groups ask us. We show up. So I feel so energized and motivated by the young people, because when I was at Vanderbilt in the 1980s, we didn't have an outlaw. Okay, it's like, and I would venture to say we would not have had an outlaw back then, because again, it was, people were not, that's not something they were comfortable with. So I'm always going somewhere, appearing on a panel, speaking, but I'm real intentional about who I surround myself with in my chambers. Diversity is not a bad word. It is a verb. I'm unapologetic about it. And, my chambers, I got some of everybody and everything at any given time. And I think that's as it should be.
And talking about mentorship, to give this all some historical perspective, Debbie Batts sat alone, the late Deborah Batts in the Southern District in New York, sat alone as the only out federal judge for many, many years after she was nominated by President Clinton. And it wasn't until, I believe, 2011, when President Obama nominated Judge Oken in New York, that we had our second out federal judge. So it's within the past 10 years, 9 years, that we've had our additional out federal judges. When Judge Yandle and I were confirmed, it was international news. It was front page news here. I was getting messages from all over the world from people. And it really struck me when I attended a friend's graduation when she got her PhD. And my partner and I were walking towards the ceremony, and a young black woman ran up to me, and she asked if I'm Judge Gayles. And of course, for those of us that have been on the bench for a while, when someone runs up to us and asks if we're a judge, right away we were a little hesitant. But I told her I was. And in tears, she told me how much Judge Yandle's and my confirmation meant to her as a lesbian woman of color. And so it is so important that we all be true to ourselves and be out and be those role models for other not just LGBTQ plus people, but all people, so they understand that there are so many opportunities available to them, and to the extent that we can help show the way, I think we have a responsibility to do so.
Might I pile on here and add some comments just for a second? So for the 12 years prior to becoming a judge, I taught in the law schools. And I was the advisor to Outlaw. I was the advisor to the Asian law students. And even in Rainbow, San Francisco, and even if the discrimination outwardly was diminishing, there was still a lot of internal, shame and homophobia that students were dealing with. And our visibility is so important because the fact that we exist, the fact of our success, the fact that we are thriving is evidence that those young students and the young lawyers can take to the bank that they can be successful and that there's nothing wrong with them, even if their family or their community, their church, their country, is telling them something different. And so, we are living proof of that. So yeah, I also believe I'm not part of your roadshow, but it is so important.
Oh, come on.
Let's go.
Let's go.
I got your roadshow, but I look forward to it.
So if I could add too,
yes,
I have a story like Judge Gayles that frankly kind of kept me in the game, because there was a time, I have to confess, when I was trotted out as the gay judge or the gay U.S. attorney, and there was a time when frankly I was thinking, you know what, I'm not just gay. I'm a lot of things. I'm gay and a judge, and gay. Right. And so there was frankly a little resistance to kind of always being put forward as the here's our gay, until one event, and this young woman came up to me afterwards, again in tears, and she said, "You don't know me, but my dad is a customs agent, which customs existed then," and she said, "I just want to tell you that in high school." I came home and my dad was talking about this assistant U.S. attorney who he was working with, who came out, and he was so confused by that. And he said, I've worked with this guy for a couple of years, and we've worked real closely on these cases. And he really was conflicted about it and really struggled with it. And she said, and so I watched him go through that, because Judge, that was you. And I saw him go through the process of saying, but I know Rob, and he's a good guy. How could this be? And she said, long story short, she said, you paved the way for me when I came out to my parents, because they had seen somebody and they had to go through it because you came out. And I mean, and I thought, okay, I'll be the gay judge from now on. That's fine.
Absolutely.
Well, and if I could just add to that, that's something that it was wonderful to go through the process with Judge Gayles, and we connected before we made it to the end. And one of the things that we agreed on was, our nominations were a week apart, or I forgot how far apart. But what is true is that President Obama made a commitment to diversify the bench in many ways, and we were certain our nominations were a product of that, and so it was intentional on his part and on the senator's part to nominate openly LGBTQ people for the bench. And so they asked me, are you comfortable with, we're gonna, when they told me that the day before I was going to be nominated, now we're going to say, we're going to give your sexual identity. Are you comfortable with that? And I'm like, I'm very comfortable with who I am. I've been comfortable with it, so I can't imagine. I'm like, I've been open with you guys from the beginning. So yes, I'm comfortable with that. So the next day when they nominated me, I was in a court hearing all morning. Phone was off. I came out, my phone was blowing up. I didn't know, I had forgotten about it. My phone was blowing up and it was like, oh my God. You're in the Huffington Post. I'm like, I'm in the Huffington Post. So I opened the Huffington Post and it's like, President Obama nominates a black lesbian. And there it was. And from that point, all the way through the remainder of the process, for the most part, that is who I was publicly and nationally and internationally. I was the black lesbian. And I had a twin who was the black gay man, and we didn't have names. And so that was my introduction to what it meant to be publicly gay. And it was different. It was I wasn't as ready for it as I thought I was, but it was something that I very shortly embraced, and Darrin and I talked, and it's like, look, if this has to be our identity, and we have to be this, and which we're fine with, so that in the years to come, it won't even be a big deal, then you know what? We can do this, and we'll handle this, and we had a lot of fun with it. But it was important to us to realize that needed, that, you know, that's what we needed to do. That's who we needed to be. That was fine with us, and we continue to embrace that.
So during the course of the conversation, we've talked about being an LGBTQ judge, and you've also talked about diversity in your chambers. And so there are two follow-up questions I have to that. The first one is, do any of you care to comment any more on how you've been perceived as a judge? Do you feel you've been treated differently because you're an LGBTQ judge? And the second question I'm going to ask you is to probe a little bit more about diversity in your chambers. So the first question, do any of you feel you've been treated differently because you were an LGBTQ judge?
You know, it's very hard to tell. I'd love to hear what my colleagues think. The amazing thing about Article 3 is it is very liberating. It's liberating in terms of your personal life as well as your judicial decisions. And thank goodness for it, because I rely on it to help me make the right decisions and not be concerned about things that should not be a part of the case. So to the extent there might be issues, I don't know that we have a good way of knowing that. I have had my court reporter, who worked for several male judges before working for me, straight male judges at that, tell me that I'm interrupted on the bench more than she's ever seen. There's now been studies about women Supreme Court justices getting interrupted by their colleagues and the lawyers more than anyone else. But I've come up with a way of dealing with it, which is that I tell the lawyers they're interrupting me, ask them to count quietly to 3 after I speak, before they speak, and that if they can't do that, I'll have them sit down and it'll be like they were never there. And so it all works out. But I have had to come up with some tools to do, but I don't know whether that's, I perceive it to be because I'm a woman, I'm relatively friendly, I try to de-escalate when I'm on the bench so that people can do their best work. So it's a little less formal in that sense.
I would say the one thing that I feel, I'm sure there may be some of that, but the one thing that I feel is, yes, I feel like I am sometimes treated and looked on differently, but in a good way. I think that there are so many people who are excited about the change and who welcome the change, and it's almost like, you know, who wholeheartedly embrace me and the change, even here in southern Illinois. And so sometimes I feel like I am undeservedly, you know, treated with more admiration than I certainly deserve, but because of at least that part of who I am and what I represent, being the walking diversity checkbox. So I think to the extent that I've sensed a different treatment has been in a positive way.
That's great. So Judge Levy,
Yeah.
You're somewhat famous for your clerkship with your judge.
Oh.
Would you tell us a little bit about that experience?
It was a fabulous experience. I interviewed with Judge Friedman in the Eastern District of Michigan in Detroit, where I now sit. And I was actually 4 months pregnant with my first child during law school when I interviewed with Judge Friedman my 2L year, and I hid the pregnancy. But on my application, on my resume, I wanted to be out because I thought I don't want to have a problem. Should it become known? It would become known. I got a partner and I was pregnant. So I put that I worked for Lambda Legal Defense and Education Fund as a summer intern, but he didn't know what that was. It turned out it didn't work. So, and my writing sample was actually a writing sample for Lambda, but perhaps it just got buried. Anyway, he hires me, and I'm working in downtown Detroit the next summer before I'm going to start, and I'm 8.5 months pregnant, and he invites me to come for lunch, and by then somebody had told him I'm a lesbian, but then I show up pregnant, and this poor man, I feel so sad that I didn't somehow explain all of this, but we got through that. It was a real, whoa, situation. But anyway, he didn't know that he'd known gay people. I had a wonderful clerkship. During that time, I had 2 more children. I stayed for 3 years, had my twins. And Judge Friedman was like an uncle, grandfather, friend to those kids to this day. And he and I learned a lot about each other, a lot of respect for each other and the things we agree on and the things we disagree on. And ultimately, he randomly drew the gay marriage challenge in Michigan. I took my twin daughters out of school. I guess it was their junior year of high school. I claimed they were sick that day because that was the argument the government was making, that children of lesbian couples or gay male couples would not be well. And we went to the trial. And we sat at this trial, so it was just a wonderful experience. So
you all have commented on diversity in your chambers. Why? Tell us with more specificity. Why is that important? Why is that important to you, Judge Pitman?
Sure. I think for reasons that others have stated, and they're obvious, and that is that even today, we've got to give assurance to people who feel marginalized or feel underrepresented that there's one of you everywhere. And you are, in your own way, you're unique, but in whatever way you feel like you're alone and that you're going to be not a part of and not a full recognized member of a profession or a community or a leader. I think the more examples of that we have, the better. And that's why I'm so glad we're seeing now the next step in the sort of struggle with trans folks and how finally it's coming into the public consciousness. And now even, with the Supreme Court ruling, we're going to really see a seismic shift in how people are going to have to understand things that they didn't before. And I think the best way to open people's mind is to put something right in front of them and make them deal with it. And it's easy to make assumptions about the other when the other is never next door to you or a member of your family or a member of your chambers. Then all of a sudden you have to face the nastiness of your assumptions and prejudices because they become apparent. And I think that's what diversity does, is it puts people next to people who need to be exposed to truths that otherwise they wouldn't have to deal with.
Yeah, in addition to what Judge Pitman said, the other piece that's important, and the reason I think we all do it, is because what we know, one aspect of diversity is, we all have different lived experiences, and people from different walks of life will have that, and it's important that that perspective be represented on the bench and in every aspect of life. But the other thing that I think we all know is that people, again, of all stripes may have equal talents. And in talking about equality, there's two parts to equality. And so many times people focus on the one part, which is equality based on ability. But that means nothing if there is not equality of opportunity. And so to the extent that we are all in positions to provide people with opportunities who may not otherwise get it, and to level that playing field, that's why I believe we all have that responsibility, and everyone on this panel believes and is committed to that responsibility, and we're intentional about it.
To emphasize what everyone else has just said, you know, it is all the above. You know, as Judge Pitman said, the public needs to see us, and as Judge Yandle said, and the other judges, that we probably have more diverse chambers than some of our colleagues. But as federal judges, there's so many other ways that we can bring about change. And, you know, one of my cases is a very large receivership. And receiverships, for example, it's a very insular group. The same people get appointed. They in turn hire the exact same people. And there's very little diversity there. And so in our capacity as judges, if it's a receivership or a class action, or any case where we have to appoint class counsel or a leadership team, I think we also have a certain sensibility and awareness that we have to point a more diverse slate when we have the opportunity to do so, or to at least set the expectations. And you know, I had a very large case where there were multiple parties, and there were probably 20 big law firms in South Florida representing the various parties. And as I looked out over the courtroom, the only black people in that courtroom were me and my courtroom deputy. And I talked about that after we concluded the hearing. And I said to the parties, I can't help but make this observation that in South Florida, one of the most diverse places in the country, the entire courtroom is white men, except for one woman. And she didn't even get to make her own appearance. Her partner made her appearance. I said, this cannot be the way we operate. And just me making that observation and that statement, the parties started bringing in people of color and women to help with their respective cases. And I think we have to set the tone for that. And so I think in that respect, it's also important that we're there.
Lori, I'd like to add some. I'm sorry, Judge Ryu. It seems to me that it is so important that the bench reflect the richness and diversity of our entire country. If we're to continue to be an institution that is legitimate, that is believed in. And for me, in terms of law clerks, hiring a richly diverse group of law clerks helps prepare them to later be on the bench. I think it's often an important step to a career that could lead to that in that direction. So I see it as my responsibility for diversifying the bench too. But also it helps me understand the language that is used in both the criminal and civil docket, cultural influences on defendants and civil litigants and in the workplace, because I have the experience of my law clerks to help inform me in what I'm lacking in diversity, which is great, what I'm lacking. And so I think it improves the entire judicial system. But also, like Judge Gayles said, for individuals to come into the courtroom and look at who we are and not see anyone remotely like them must be just terrifying and disturbing. So I try to do my part to make sure that as much of my entire staff is reflective of those who come before me. I also have a large case right now with probably 500 lawyers on it, but only 100 or so come to court at a time. And it is of those, let's say 100 that will be there this afternoon in a couple of hours on Zoom. There'll be about 2 women with speaking roles, if that, probably 1. And it just has to change. It just has to change. And so I'm trying to do my part to make sure that changes.
Yeah. If I could just add in a quick thought here too, I think we as a group are speaking to different aspects of the importance of diversity. One is the public-facing aspect, that for the world to have confidence that we are producing equal justice under law, we have to reflect that. One is the inward-looking, which is we've all acknowledged that when we are working together, when there's diverse views influencing each of us, and as we influence our colleagues, we're going to get to better decision-making because we can stand in each other's shoes and understand the world more fully. And then finally, a piece that I really resonates with me are the statements you're making about intentionality. I mean, we're in positions to make things happen, whether it's about, in my court, we have a statement on our website that goes to what Judge Yandle was saying about our commitment to having underrepresented people or younger lawyers also speak in court. A number of us have the kind of standing orders that you mentioned. A number of us have ones that say, if you want to be called by your preferred pronoun, please let us know and put that in your caption. We can do things around making sure that all of our committees, our lawyer representatives, people who invited to our district conference represent different groups so all voices are heard. But it doesn't just happen. It's about making intentional moves by those in power.
So when you're making intentional moves and you have an opportunity to say to a young lawyer coming up, what are some of the types of advice that you would give to them, particularly to a young lawyer who's LGBTQ?
I just think the default, my go-to default is, and I think it overcomes most things, and just be your authentic self. Everything, and that doesn't mean you're not going to run into bumps in the road. That doesn't mean you're not going to have challenges, but what I believe it does mean is you're going to be able to handle them because you're comfortable in your own skin. So at bottom, if all else fails, you have that. So lead with that and let everything else fall in place.
So as we begin to wind down, I've got a few more topics that I think would be helpful to our audience if you touched upon. So we have, looking back, the historical context of the Stonewall Rebellion. And now we have what's happening in society right now. Black Lives Matter and a focus on racial justice. Would you care to comment on, and I think to some degree, Judge Pitman talked about bravery that he sees now, but we saw bravery then, and we see another type of bravery now. Would any of you like to comment on what you're seeing now and what that, in your opinion, suggests is happening in society right now and how we move forward?
I think Judge Levy, who was an activist and who amongst us has actually been an activist and was out there, I would love to hear her perspective because I think she has valuable insight. I would love to hear that.
That's so kind of you, Judge Yandle. I am so thrilled by what we're seeing in the streets, on social media. I mean, there's a lot on social media, but I just can't tell you how excited and happy I am to see renewed activism and connection across so many different planes. To me, the Stonewall Rebellions, Black Lives Matter, it's all one movement for justice and equality, and it is so long overdue. And those of us here in this panel see in our courtrooms the impact of mass incarceration in this country, over-incarceration of Black and brown people. We see excessive force cases every day. We're asked to apply qualified immunity. That now young people are talking about qualified immunity? I'm shocked and excited and encouraged that that's happening. My 93-year-old mother asked me to explain qualified immunity to her the other day. I thought, this is amazing. Yeah. So I just can't say, I think it's so long overdue and so important to keep this momentum going. I saw a Fourth Circuit decision that talked about George Floyd's, the homicide there. I'm seeing other written, published decisions from the Sixth Circuit where I sit that are reflecting on the Black Lives Matter movement as they make qualified immunity decisions in these cases. And I really see an impact that the movement has on our work and on our courtrooms, on my own thought process and my own opening my mind more and my heart more to what I need to learn to do my job better. So I welcome it, and I'm just so encouraged out of something so horrific that something so important and full of hope is happening.
So we asked people in the AO and in the judiciary to submit questions in advance. And from two different sources, I got a similar question. And it has to do with music. So I'll direct this question to Judge Yandle and then ask any of the other judges to join in if you have something to add or differ in your perspective. And so the question is, Pride may have started off as an act of protest, but it has evolved into a celebration of community and the vibrancy of the LGBTQ culture. Music has always been a key part of Pride celebrations, not only because so many songs resonate with the experiences of the community, songs like Diana Ross's I'm Coming Out and Lady Gaga's Born This Way, but because many of the headlining performers also have been strong allies of the community. If you were to create a playlist for Pride, what three songs would you want to include and why?
First, it would have to be I Will Survive by Gloria Gaynor, because that is an anthem. And I mean, you can't have a playlist without I Will Survive. Okay. And next, because, I'm kind of maybe surprisingly into ballads and show tunes and such, but one of my favorite songs, which would have to be on my playlist, is Somewhere by Barbra Streisand. I think it's very inspirational. I think it was something that when I was struggling or processing through who I am and getting, comfortable with that, that was a song that touched me. And finally, I guess this would be my second coming out experience, because I'm now going to come out of the closet as a Taylor Swift fan. And it would have to be You Need to Calm Down. Why? Because they do need to calm down. And because I really appreciate Taylor Swift as an ally. Excellent.
Are there any other songs any of the other judges would add to this playlist?
I only say, as I joke with my friends, Diana Ross, her song "The Boss." I think I joke with them that made me gay. And Donna Summer pushed me over the edge. If Diana Ross put my toe on the line, Donna Summer pushed me over the edge. But
a particular Donna Summer song?
I think Bad Girls probably did it. But it's in our community. There's this wonderful tie to the arts, and I can't explain it, but music and art in all kinds of forms. I don't know. It seems to resonate in our community so much, and I think it's wonderful.
Well, I endorse your lists. I can tell that perhaps we grew up around the same time, because some of the music was definitely the music I was listening to and dancing to. It's the music of liberation. I guess I would also have to add Sister Sledge, We Are Family. And anything by Prince, because as we were talking about, be yourself, be authentic. The man was so authentic and really kind of embraced queerness in a way that was astounding.
Absolutely.
I'm just shocked that Judge Gayles didn't say it's raining men. I'm sorry. I just got to say it.
Well.
So I'll say it.
Thank you.
Gotta have the weather girls. Gotta have it.
Okay. So as we wind down, are there any thoughts or words that you would like to leave this audience with as we close out? And if I'd ask each of you, if you care to weigh in, please do so. We could start with Judge Pitman.
Sure. I think I'll loop back to something that I made reference to before, because it's increasingly important to me. As Judge Levy said, it's our job to keep open minds and open hearts. And I want to continue to look for opportunities to expand in ways that even at my age, doing the work I've been doing for a long time, I've got room to go. And the minute we think we've arrived, or that we have our way of seeing the world is complete, and that we haven't, we've reached a point where we have a pretty good understanding of how things are, then you need to start worrying. And so I would encourage all of us as judges, as people who do this work, to look for opportunities to grow in ways that I hope that in 5 years I have different opinions about things, even important things, because I need to re-examine. And the minute we stop re-examining, even closely held beliefs, then I think we run a risk of committing grave error, because we've asked other people and we've benefited from other people opening up and seeing things a new way. And I think that obligation continues for all of us.
Thank you. Judge Ryu?
What I'd say is this. We recently in the judiciary went through or started beginning a reckoning with issues of sexual harassment. And I think we, cleaning house and looking at our practices and doing some more education. And what I'd say is that we have so many LGBTQ people, wonderful people in every corner of this branch who serve every day. And it's my hope that all of those individuals, whether probation, pretrial, marshal service, clerk's office, librarians, judges, that everyone can feel respected and safe in the work that they do, that they don't have to waste time on an energy on having their guard up against slurs or snubs and that kind of thing. And that we shouldn't have to go through a reckoning. We can get ahead of the game by doing education among ourselves. And Lori, hats off to you. Thank you for putting this panel together. I think that's a part of that work.
Thank you. Judge Gayles.
With everything happening in the world, I've been amazed by how opinion has changed on some hot button issues in such a short period of time. I'm encouraged by our young people and their engagement and making what they think is effective change in this country. And so I'm hopeful. And as Judge Pitman said earlier, who would have thought that so many young people would be as out and proud and confident as they are now? When I was in law school and a member of the Gay and Lesbian Law Student Association, as it was called then, we wouldn't dare put our association on a resume for fear we wouldn't get hired. And now I get regularly applicants where students are proudly expressing who they are on the resumes, not just for us, the out LGBTQ judges, but for judges in general. As Judge Rio said, respect and safety of course, is what we all want for everyone, not just in the LGBTQ community, but for everyone. And I think the future is bright, and whatever small part that I can play in that process, I'm happy to do that.
Judge Yandle?
I think in this time in our country and in the world, one thing that I've been really focusing on in the last 4 months that I've been teleworking from home and kind of watching and feeling what's happening in the world is just a recommitment and just feeling energized by the young people and just people in this country in general who are coming together to speak with one voice. And I'm encouraged, and I would encourage my colleagues on this panel, whom I know I don't have to encourage because I know they're going to do it. But I think it's important, and I feel empowered to bring those different values and sensibilities that we bring to the table because of who we are, and be unapologetic about it, and you know, and just say, you know what, yeah, I have a different perspective, and I have a different perspective because this is part of my life or what have you, and not be not hesitate and be okay with putting that out there, and I think feeling empowered by it. In other words, I think one of the themes that keeps coming up in these days is, and I've had a lot of friends that say, you know, in dealing with the issue of racism, you know, I'm not racist, I don't see color. It's like, no, I need you to see color. It's, you know, you got to see it and acknowledge the differences and the value to really embrace what's happening. And so, yeah, you see color, see identity, and acknowledge and respect it.
Thank you. Judge Levy.
Yeah, thank you, Lori. Well, first of all, I just want to say how much I've learned and how much I've enjoyed this panel. And for those of you who are listening, whenever you're listening or watching us, I just want to thank you for taking the time to do it. And I hope that we've offered something to you that you can take away that can help you in your own life. And I don't have much more to say than that, other than that I have found that bringing my whole self to anything that I'm doing, whether it's lawyering or judging or parenting, has always helped me do my best work and be my best self. And so I would just encourage everyone to keep doing that whenever you possibly can. And like others have said, we sure hope it can be within the judiciary that you can be your whole self. And if you can't, you're going to call Lori and she's going to help you, or call one of us and we're going to help you too. But so are the various plans in each district. So thank you so much for listening to all of us. And I'm just so thrilled that the AO wanted to do this, and here we are.
Well, on behalf of the AO and the judiciary as a whole, I've got to say that this was a wonderful presentation. I'd like to thank you all for taking the time to be a part of it. These are, as I said before, hectic times in many, many respects. But the fact that you all came together and joined us in this keynote presentation for 2020 Pride is amazing. I really don't know how to tell you how important this was to the Office of Fair Employment Practices, that we could pull you all together, have you speak to the judiciary, and continue our efforts around diversity and inclusion, and be a part of our commitment to making sure that everyone feels included and welcome and able to bring their full selves to the environment in which they work. With that, thank you again so very much.